so excited to bring the message to you guys this morning. And most of you also probably know that I live out in Appin. And in Appin, there is quite a lot of bushland. And there is also quite a lot of motorbike riders. And what these motorbike riders love to do is they love to ride their motorbikes in the bushland. But not everybody likes this. So as you go into the bush, what you'll notice two things. Right? You'll notice that there are barriers. There are barriers that try to stop the motorbike riders from accessing the bushland. And so there might be these giant big boulders, or there might be some barbed wire fence. There might be a big, huge tree log that, they've put across the entrance. Or sometimes even the council have put in these impenetrable metal fences that you think surely they're not going to be able to get through. But what you'll also notice when you see these barriers is that there are actually places of breakthrough, right? There are places of breakthrough where these motorbike riders have managed to make a way. They have managed to make a way through the barriers so that they can get into the bush and to ride their motorbikes. And today we are talking about learning to be with Jesus. Learning to be with Jesus. And as we think about that, I just want to make a few points is that, there's a difference between spending time with someone and there's a difference between actually being with someone, right? There's a difference between spending time with someone and there's a difference to being with someone. And so today, as we talk about learning to be with Jesus, I want you to reflect on how are you spending your time with Jesus? Are you actually being with Jesus? And I wonder for you if there are some barriers, right? I wonder for you if there are some barriers that come into play when you try to be with Jesus. In the book, Practicing the Way, some of us have been reading through that as a church. It's a great book, but there's one quote that talks about being with Jesus, and it says, "I look at him and he looks at me and we are happy." I look at him, he looks at me, and we are happy. And so as we think about actually being with Jesus this morning, I want us to notice those barriers. And my question for you is, are you going to be like the motorbike rider? Right? Are you going to be like the motorbike rider who is so persistent, who is so passionate, who so wants to be in the bush, that the motorbike rider finds a way to break through the barriers so that he can be in that space? And so for you this morning, as we reflect on what barriers are you coming up against, my question for you, are you going to be persistent enough? Are you going to be passionate enough? Is your desire to be with Jesus going to be something that helps you to actually break through these barriers so that you can be with him? And so it's probably the school teacher in me, but I've handed you guys out some worksheets which are on the seats. And one side of that worksheet has the passage that we're looking at today. It's the extended version. But on the other side, there's a few sort of fill in the blanks. And I just want to give you guys about 60 seconds to think about what are the barriers that you come up against when you are trying to be with Jesus, right? What are the barriers that you come up against when you are trying to be with Jesus? And so just take 60 seconds to think about what would those top 3 barriers be for you. All right, so I wonder if there's a few brave people out there that would like to throw out their answers. Maybe what are some barriers that they have come up against when they have tried to be with Jesus? Hurry. Great one. Hurry. Hurry has been a barrier for you spending time with Jesus. What about for some other people? What are some barriers? Children. Oh, I didn't think about that one. That's a good one, Jenny. How about for other people? Concentration. Yeah, concentration. I know someone at Osher last week said distractions. Yeah. The stress of the day. Stress levels coming up in the day, definitely. Yeah, sometimes we start it all nice and peaceful, like, yeah, Jesus, I'm going to be with you. And then, a few things happen. Nothing to do with children though, right? So for each of us, we have barriers that we come up against. And so I'm just going to take you one step deeper. So I want you to think about those barriers, okay? And I want you to think of an iceberg. And so I'm sure most of us in the room have heard the idea for an iceberg that when you have an iceberg, 10% of the iceberg is above the water, but there's 90% of the iceberg that's actually below the water. And so as you reflect on your barriers, what I would love for you today is to start to think, is the thing that I've written down, is that a 10%? Is that what's above the surface? And is there actually something going on deeper below the surface that is actually a barrier that stops me from being with Jesus? And so as I'm talking now, I know that when it comes to writing things down in church, it's really confronting when you're writing down these deep, like, almost secret things and there's someone sitting right next to you. So don't feel like you have to write those 3 things down here. If you do, great work. But if you don't, maybe these are things that you're going to have to go home and reflect on. But I just want to share with you 3 of the barriers that I've come up against. And then I want to talk about how I've sort of done, some searching about what's actually going on underneath the surface. And so one of the barriers that I have personally come up against with spending time with Jesus is the barrier of time. And I can assure that I reckon everyone has written that down on their piece of paper in one way or another. And so time for me in my relationship with Jesus has become a barrier into me not only spending time with him, but to me actually with being with him. And as I've reflected on that, and if I'm trying to be really honest with myself, I think what I've realized is that I am actually chasing harder after other things than what I am after Jesus. Right? I think I'm actually chasing harder after something else than what I am after Jesus. And so if I really, really believe, not only with my thoughts and my mind, but also with my actions, that Jesus was my joy, that Jesus was my peace, that Jesus was my strength, then nothing would stop me from being with him. Right? There would be nothing that could get in the way, because I would know my only way to make it through the day is if that I came and I was with Jesus. And so I've had to reflect on that and journey that and say, you know what, do I actually truly believe that Jesus is my everything? That he is my joy, that he is my peace, that he is my strength, that he is the way, the truth, and the life? And as that conviction has sunk deeper inside of me, there has been more of an invitation into actually coming into that space with Jesus. And another barrier that I have come up against is the barrier of anxiety. And, this one really sort of messed with my mind, because not in a way, Jesus is peace. But I was actually having this experience where when I would go and I would sit down and I would try to spend time with Jesus, my anxiety levels went from maybe like a 1 or a 2 up to a 7 or an 8. And so inside of me, there was a resistance. There was a barrier that I actually didn't want to enter into this space with Jesus because I was being anxious. And I don't know about you, but that's not fun. Anxiety is not fun. And so this was a barrier for me spending time with Jesus. And as I spent some time searching that and reflecting on that, not just ignoring that, but actually going, what's going on underneath the surface? What I realized is that I actually had some trust issues with Jesus. Right? I had some trust issues. I remember asking God, saying, I actually don't even know if I believe in you. I don't even know if you're there. And then if you are there, I don't actually know if you're good. I don't know if I can trust you. And so I had to spend some time and some space exploring with this with Jesus and actually building up my trust in him. Building up my trust in him so that when I came to him, I wasn't anxious, but he became a safe space for me. And the last barrier that I've come up against, and I'm hoping Ryan doesn't fire me for saying this, no one cut this, right? You got to put it in context. But sometimes I found it boring, right? Like reading my Bible, praying. Does anyone experience that? No, it's just me. Thank you, Matt. Another pastor. Whoa. Go honesty. No, dead set, right? Sometimes that's a bit boring, that's just, and I don't know if you guys have noticed this about me, but stillness, it's not really my jam. And so I was like, I don't really know if that's what I want to do with my free time that I have available to me. And so, I explored this. What's going on? What's going on? And what I've realized is that I actually didn't have intimacy with Jesus, right? I didn't have intimacy with Jesus. You see, I don't know about you, but if there is any moment in my life where I have felt seen, where I have felt known, and when I have felt loved, I've never felt bored, right? When I felt seen, when I felt known, when I felt loved, I never felt bored. And so I wasn't actually entering in, I was spending time with Jesus, right? I was spending time with Jesus, but I didn't know how to be with Jesus. And so this was a barrier for me. But as I came to understand that, as I came to realize what was going on underneath the surface, then let me tell you that Jesus brought breakthrough into my life, right? Jesus brought breakthrough. When I took a barrier to Jesus, he brought a breakthrough. And so today we are going to be looking at a passage from, if we can bring it up on the screen, from John chapter 15, verses 1 to 5. And so I've given you guys the extended verse of that passage, and I would love for you to spend some time reading that this week. But today we're just going to focus on the first 5 verses. The first 5 verses. And we are going to look at the barriers and the breakthroughs that we see in these verses. But before we jump into it, I just want to explain to you the metaphor that's going on. And so when Jesus speaks in the Bible, often he is talking in a parable, a picture, a metaphor, right? He's using that picture to explain something. And he's using a picture around gardening because back in those times, lots of people would have understood that. But I think for today, as I read through this passage, I'm not a great gardener, but I still got the context. So I'm hoping that, today we'll all be able to follow along and understand what Jesus is trying to say. And so there's 4 elements in this passage. I'm going to tell you what they are, and then I'm going to quickly quiz you. So listen, don't stop listening to me, all right? So there's 4 elements. The first element is the gardener, and the gardener represents God, okay? The second element is the vine, the true vine, and the true vine represents Jesus. The third element is the branch, and the branch represents us. And the fourth element is the fruit, and the fruit represents our lives. All right, are you ready for your quiz, your pop quiz? All right, so what does the gardener represent? God. What does the vine represent? What does the branch represent? And what does the fruit represent? All right, excellent. So if you've got that, I'm going to read through this passage, but keep that in mind. And this is what it says. It says, I am the true vine. This is Jesus speaking. And my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit. And he prunes the branches that do bear fruit, so they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine. And you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine and you are the branch. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. And so in this picture, we can see that God is the gardener, that Jesus is the vine, that we are the branch. And the fruit, he's saying, if you can enter into this kind of relationship where you will let God be the gardener, where you will let Jesus be the vine, where if you let yourself be the humble branch, then your fruit, your lives will be good. And so what I want to do is I want us to start by looking at what are some of the barriers that we see in this passage. And the first barrier that we see, I'm going to label that the barrier of self-reliance, right? The barrier of self-reliance. You see, in the very first verse, it says, I am the true grapevine. And what Jesus is referring to here is that in the Old Testament, the Israelites, so the Old Testament is the first chunk of the Bible that happens all before Jesus. And the Israelites were God's special chosen people. And so in the Old Testament, when a metaphor was being made about the vine, often the Israelites were the vine, right? Often the Israelites were the vine. And so when Jesus says, I am the true vine, right, he is saying to them, right, he's saying, I think you've forgotten, right? You're not the vine. I am the true vine. I am the source. I am the energy. Everything flows from me, and you are the branch. And so I wonder for us, do we need that reminder too? Can that be a barrier for us as we come and try to be with Jesus? Do we forget that he is the vine? And do we try to be the vine? Do we rely on ourselves for our own strength and our own source and energy? Right? When you think of the vine actually holds strong so the branches can grow. But how often do we try to be the strong ones? Right? How often do we try to be the vine? And Jesus is saying, if you want to be with me, right, the deal is that God is the gardener and that I am the vine. I am the vine. Jesus is the true vine and you are the branch. And so I wonder for you as you reflect on what some barriers might be for you being with Jesus. Are any of them linked to self-reliance? Are any of them linked to self-reliance? And the second barrier that I see in this passage is the barrier of not letting go, right? The barrier of not letting go. And so it talks in this passage about how God is the gardener and how he actually completely cuts off the branches that aren't producing fruit. And so what that's saying to us is that there are things in our lives that God will actually want to cut off, which means that we need to be willing to let go of something. Right? That if we want to enter into this relationship where we can be with Jesus, that there are things in our life that we need to be willing to let go of. And so I wonder for you as you reflect on what might be the barriers that are getting in between me and Jesus. Is there something that you are holding on tightly to right now? Is there something you are holding on and you're almost swatting away the gardener saying, no, I don't give you permission? Is there something that you actually need to let go of and give God, the gardener, permission to come and cut away? To come and cut away. And the third barrier that I see in this passage is the barrier of pruning. And a way that I want to describe this today is it's the willingness to go through a short-term pain for a long-term promise. You see, pruning is different to cutting off, right? Cutting off is just boop, like it's gone, off it goes. But pruning, it tells us that it's actually a branch that has some fruit, but the gardener wants to come in and prune it so that it can be even more fruitful. And so I wonder, is there an area in your life that Jesus or God, the gardener, is actually calling you into that is actually going to bring short-term pain for a long-term promise? Right? Is there something that God is calling you into that is going to bring a short-term pain for a long-term promise? And for us, we need to decide, are we willing? Can we trust God enough to say, I will go through the short-term pain because of the long-term promise? And I think a really great example of this is everyone who came up and stood on this stage for spiritual formation this year at LL. I think spiritual formation is such a great example of going through a short-term pain for a long-term promise, right? It's saying, you know what, God, I am going to let you prune me. I'm going to allow you to bring pain into my life, but I'm going to believe and I'm going to trust and I'm going to hope that there is a long-term promise that you are at work with, right? God is the gardener. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. And so as we reflect on these barriers, I wonder if anything's coming up for you, right? Is a barrier for you that you are self-reliant? Is there a barrier of not willing to let go? Is there something that you are holding on to? Right? Is there a barrier of a resistance of going through a short-term pain for a long-term promise? And today, I want to encourage you, right? I want to encourage you to say that sometimes those barriers look so big and so impenetrable and so like I don't even know what to do about that. But, just like I believe in the motorbike riders in Appen, and, I've learned to know that, it doesn't matter what they put in the way. Like, I've been there for 10 years and they've been trying for 10 years. And you know what? I've come to the resolve that it doesn't matter what barriers they put in, those motorbike riders will find a way, right? They will find a way. And I have all hope and faith that you will find a way. I have all hope and faith that you will find a way because you have Jesus working on your side. So those barriers today, nothing is too big, nothing is too strong, nothing is too impenetrable for Jesus to not break through. Right? Jesus actually wants to break through the barriers. And in this passage, he gives us a picture of what that looks like, right? What it actually looks like when we enter into this relationship with him. And as I was reading through this passage in the Message paraphrase, it used these words intimate and organic. So rather than remain in me and I remain in you, right, it says that you will have an intimate and an organic relationship with me. And these words they just really stuck out to me. And so I thought I'm going to look up their definition. And this is what the definition of intimate is. It says closely acquainted, familiar, private, personal, a very close friend. Church, I wonder how many people come across Australia, across the globe. I wonder how many churchgoers come and sit in their seats but can't actually say that I'm quite closely acquainted with Jesus. Right? That aren't familiar, aren't private, aren't personal, aren't a very close friend. Right? Can you hear me? That Jesus is inviting you into this kind of relationship. Right? He wants to be closely acquainted with you. He wants to have a familiar, a private, a personal connection with you. Right? He came down to this earth. He left heaven and came down to this, I don't know if you've noticed, but not quite so lovely earth and died on a cross so that he could be closely acquainted with you, so that he could be private and he could be personal. But yet we exchange that relationship for what? A Sunday appointment? For a Sunday appointment? No, Jesus wants to be intimate with you. He wants to be intimate with you. And I looked up the definition of organic, and I'm shifting gears a little bit because I didn't like that one. So I'm not going to read it out to you because it was all about fruit and vegetables. So I came up with my own. I hope you don't mind. But right, organic. This is what I think it means. This is what it means to me. That it's natural. That it's not forced. That it's simply being what it's created to be. Right, if I think about an organic blueberry, right? If it's not organic, then someone's injected something into the soil or into the plant to try to make it bigger, stronger, better, right? But did you know that God doesn't want you bigger, stronger, better? He actually wants you organic. He wants you to simply be what you were created to be. Right? He just wants you to simply be what you were created to be. For a lot of us sitting here in the room, that this might be the only relationship where we have permission to do that. Right? It might be the only relationship where we have permission to simply be who we're created to be. For most of us, our workplaces, our friends, our spouses, our children, most of those spaces won't just accept us They want us bigger. They want us stronger. They want us better. And that's just because they're not perfect. They're not trying to hurt you, right? Just like how we're probably not trying to hurt that blueberry. We think we're doing that blueberry a good thing. But Jesus is inviting you into this space. He's saying, just come and be with me. Simply be who you were created to be. You see, this is the kind of breakthrough that will happen when you let God be the gardener, when you let Jesus be the vine, and when you just allow yourself to just humbly, simply be the branch. Right? Jesus and God will actually bring the fruit. As you read further through that passage, it talks about how when we have this relationship with God, not only will it be this intimate and organic space, but we will have a humble and obedient relationship with God, where we will come under him and say, yes, God, have your will. It talks about how it will help us to mature, that we won't be walking around in this world as like, big people bodies and little kid minds, but that God will actually mature us and help us to grow up in him. The passage talks about how if we can enter into this kind of relationship, then that we will know that we are loved and we will have that ability to love well, to love our work colleagues, to love our friends, to love our spouses, to love our children, so that we can actually simply let them be who they were created to be. You see, when we enter into this relationship with Jesus, when we let God be the gardener, Jesus be the vine, and we are the branch, fruit will grow. Your barriers will turn into breakthrough. And so as we head to the end of this message, I just want to talk a little bit about application of how can we do this? How can we enter into this space to be with Jesus? And so I'm breaking it up into two sections. One section, it's going to be super practical. And then another section, I'm going to just talk to your spirit. And so for the practical section, I've got top 10 tips. All right. And so these are one of Ryan's ideas and 9 of mine. And also some of them, they sort of come from the book. But each of these top 10 tips are something that I've experimented in when I've learned to be with Jesus. And you know what? We're not really ever experts in things, right? We're not the expert. And so we are practicing the way. We are trying to learn to be with Jesus. And so I just wonder that as we talk about these top 10 things, maybe there's one or two that you could underline and say, hey, I'm going to try that. I'm going to give that a go and see if that helps me, one, either start spending time with Jesus, but two, I wonder if there's something that you need to shift from spending time with Jesus to being with Jesus. Okay. And so I'm just going to quickly sort of rapid fire through these top 10 tips. And I'm hoping that one or two of these might stand out for you. So the first one, this is Ryan's, and it's called Hijack a Habit. And so, for some of us, we are time poor and we think, you know what, I don't have a spare second in the day. And so maybe sometimes we can just hijack a habit, something that we have or that we're already doing, and use that to spend time with Jesus. And so I know for Ryan, this began, it used to be his breakfast time. He hijacked his breakfast and he spent his time with Jesus. And now what I think happened is that what Jenny said is I think he had children. And I think the children then hijacked his Jesus time that had hijacked his breakfast time. So then he shifted that, and he has in his shower time now, he listens to a prayer app. And so you can hijack a habit, something that you're already doing, and use that time to be with Jesus. Another idea is that you can write down a gratitude list / a worry box. And so sometimes when we're entering into space with Jesus, a really great way to enter that space is with a heart of gratitude. And so just listing the things that you are grateful for that you can see God working in. And it's just this way, you even think of those relationships in your life, when you compliment someone, it's like sometimes it shifts the atmosphere. And so maybe that might help shift the atmosphere between you and God rather than coming to him with, wants. It's actually going, I'm thankful. I'm thankful for what you are doing. And the other idea in compensation with that is the idea of a worry box and writing down all your worries, because sometimes our worries or our stresses can get in the way. They become barriers. So actually writing all those worries down in a box and then one at a time praying and saying, Jesus, I just want to give this to you, right? And then just handing over your worries so those barriers will be moved and you can be with Jesus. Another one, this is one that's in the book, but I've also used this for many, many years, is the idea of finding a secret place. Finding a secret place. And there's something about, I'm not smart enough to know the actual research, but I'm sure it's out there. There's something about our physical environment that impacts our internal spirit, right? There's something about our physical environment that impacts our internal spirit. And so when we have this secret place, it's like sometimes all we need to do is step into this physical environment and our body like relaxes. And so for me, one of my secret places is the bush. And when I went out on a prayer walk and I noticed the barriers and the breakthroughs, I was on my way to a prayer walk with God. And like as soon as I enter into the bush, like I just feel like something just fall away within me. And it's like there's a barrier that's there and then it just falls away and I'm with my Jesus. And then another top tip is first things first. And so, often we say that Jesus is first in my life, but he's not often the way that we start our day. And so I wonder if we could try before our feet hit the floor in the morning, if we could just call out a prayer to heaven, just say, Jesus, good morning. Ryan said that this morning, just good morning. Just acknowledge that he is there, that he is with you. Invite him into your day. The first things first. Number 5, turn off notifications. And if you're like under, I don't know, maybe 30, you're like, no, they're so important to me. And, the book talks about this, but this is something that I've done that the only notifications that come up on my phone are my messages and my phone calls. But every other notification gets turned off. And I made the mistake of, this is another shame. Anyone shop from Temu? So I made the mistake of shopping from Temu, and to get the bargain, you have to allow notifications. And man, they go to town with notifications. And so within a day, I was honestly, they're just trying to, all my desire to buy materialistic things and think, that's where I'll find my happiness comes out. And so actually shutting down those notifications, shutting down those interruptions, because wouldn't it be awesome if we got distracted with Jesus, right? Wouldn't it be awesome if we got distracted with Jesus, not Temu? And then the next one, number 6, is to get rid of or dramatically reduce social media. And so this is something else that I've done in my life, is that I don't go on social media. I don't go on social media because I found that it could just so easily be the filler in my day, right? It could so easily be the filler in my day. But once again, how good would it be if Jesus was our filler, right? If Jesus was our filler. And so rather than going to our phones or rather going to social media, we are actually coming back to him throughout the day and saying, I want to be with you. I want to be with you. And the next one sort of links into this, but it might be something different. So number 7, give up something that takes up your time and leaves you feeling empty, frustrated, or intoxicated. And so I wonder for you, is there something in your life that takes up your time, but then afterwards you feel empty, frustrated, or intoxicated? And I don't mean intoxicated just in the sense of alcohol, but I mean in this, there's some things in this world that take us on this big high, but then there's this big low that follows. And can I just remind you that Jesus is not a Jesus of high and lows, right? That he doesn't take us up to these big highs and then just let us go and let us fall to the floor. But so many things in this world do that, right? So many things in this life, in this time, in this age, they just sort of take us up into the sky. But then we have this this dramatic fall to the floor. And so I wonder for you, is there something in your life that fits into that category? You might say, you know what, just this week I'm going to stop watching that TV show. Or this week I'm going to stop that unhealthy habit. And I'm just going to notice how it impacts the ability that I have to actually be with Jesus. And then number 8 is about using the in-between time. You know, sometimes it could just be your drive to and from work. Sometimes it could just be when you're boiling your kettle. I don't know about you, but I drink tea a lot. I know Jess Graham could use this one. She likes her tea. But, you know, every time you boil the kettle, is that your time where you just stop? You just be with Jesus. I know we all have in-between time. Is it when you're at a traffic light, when you stop at a traffic light? Like what could be your in-between time that you could give to Jesus this week? What could be your in-between time that you give to Jesus? And number 9 is the idea of journaling. And so, you know, if intimacy is an issue for you with Jesus, journaling is a great way to just pour your heart out. And like for me, even I had to start my journaling not being like a journal to Jesus because I was having some issues there, but I just started journaling. And then, then I started being like, being aware of that Jesus can see this, Jesus can hear this, right? And it's almost like as I journal now, it's like, Jesus is watching me, that he can see what I write, he can feel what I feel, that he's there. And as I journal, it's actually a way that I can connect with him and be with him. And the other idea is the idea of prayer walks. And so I spoke to you earlier about how I was anxious. And so I sort of admitted that, I can't just sit and be with Jesus, right? Even though, yes, I'm a pastor and I probably should, but probablys and should do's don't really work in my life. I don't know about you, right? Probablys and shoulds don't really work. And so I just had to accept and admit, I'm not here. I'm not there. I'm not Zen, right? I'm not a monk. I'm not there. And so I started to walk and pray. And so that it was like the walking took out the anxiousness. And then Jesus met me in those spaces. Like some of the most powerful and transformative moments in my life happened while I was walking with Jesus. And now I can sit. Now I sit down and I can just have my quiet time with him. But I had to also accept and admit that for a season I couldn't. And so I wonder for you, maybe there's something there that stands out for you, something really practical, something that might help you overcome one of those barriers.